So, in this video, we're going to be talking about what happens when your system breaks. The objective of this video is to help business owners understand disaster recovery and plan for resilience. The objective is, and the value that business owners will find is that they'll have an idea of how to plan a how to create a disaster recovery plan. And so what happens when your system breaks, and it will, right? So you've built your AI system, you've organized your information beautifully, but there's a question most founders don't ask until it's too late, which is what happens when it breaks? And I'm not asking if, I'm asking when, because systems always fall eventually. Your database could crash, your data could be corrupted, a power outage could take everything offline, a cyber attack could lock you out, and so the question every business owner should ask is, how bad would it be? If your system went down right now for 1 hour, what would happen? But let me ask you this. Right? So what happens when your house burns down? You know, that's that's a scary question. Most people don't want to think about it, but insurance companies do, because disaster happens. And hence the same is true for your AI system. Disaster will happen, your system will go down, data will be lost. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And so the question is, are you prepared? And as you can see here, every distributed system will experience failures. This is because availability is about managing failure, not preventing it. And most systems experience 10 to 15% unplanned downtime annually. And so the financial reality of not being, and there's a financial reality of not being prepared, which leads us to our downtime costs. And so downtime costs, what is a downtime cost, and how can we view it as a lost opportunity? So a downtime cost is the financial impacts of system unavailability, including lost revenue, customer churn, SLA violations, and emergency repair costs. Let me show you what downtime actually costs. Right? Think about an airline. If a major airline grounds their fleet for 6 hours, missed flights is over 200, the revenue per flight is probably $10,000, the lost revenue is 2 million. But it's worse than that. Customers book competitions next time, reputational damage, getting the label as an unreliable airline, operational costs, such as rebooks and compensation. So the total cost would range between $5 to $10 million. And so for a 6 hour outage, now ask, what's your business's flight, right? If your e-commerce goes down, if your e-commerce site goes down, lost transactions occur, potentially thousands lost, customers go to competitors, reputation damage, and similar economics, which basically means small downtime equals massive costs. And so here's the evidence from industry. So there's Amazon AWS stats, which is 99.9% uptime, which cost them over $150 million in infrastructure. Then there's Stripe research, right? Where 1 hour of downtime costs their customers $4.7 million aggregate, right? And the enterprise customers lose 10 to 30% of daily revenue. And so this takes us to the two numbers that determine your survival, which is your RTO and your RPO. Right? So your RTO is your recovery time objective, and what is it? Your RTO is the maximum acceptable time your system can be down before business operations are significantly impacted. This determines how fast you need to recover from failure. And so, how can you think of RTO? Think of it like your tolerance for being locked out of your house. Can you afford 15 minutes locked out? Sure, it's inconvenient. An hour locked out, okay, it's frustrating. 4 hours locked out, maybe. However, it's serious. 24 hours locked out, no way, that is unacceptable. And so your business has the same target. Can you afford to lose? Lost hours, transactions. Some businesses, yes, some no. Lost days, transactions, most say no. Lost week's transactions, most say no. Last month's transactions, most say unacceptable. Right? And so step one is you start by calculating your RTO. You ask yourself, right? And so what you do is you ask yourself, how much is 1 hour of downtime worth to us, right? For example, if you have an e-commerce store, maybe 10 to 50K per hour. A SaaS app, maybe 1,000 to 10K per hour. Your internal tool, maybe 100 to $1,000 per hour. So now you ask, what's the longest we can afford to be down? And so if 1 hour costs $10,000, can we afford 1 hour? Most say barely. Can we afford 4 hours? Most say no, we'd lose 40K. Can we afford 24 hours? Most say we'd go out of business. And this leads us to the RTO, right? Which is, my bad. And so basically your RTO is, like I said again, the maximum downtime you can tolerate before it's a crisis. And then it takes us to RPO, right? What is RPO? RPO is your recovery point objective. And so how do we think of RPO, right? Think of it like how much mail you can afford to lose. Can you afford to lose today's mail? Maybe. This week's mail, it's getting worse. This month's mail, probably not. This year's mail, definitely not. And so it's similar with your data. Can you afford to lose lost hours transactions? Some businesses say yes, some no. Lost days transactions, most say no. Lost weeks transactions, most say no. Lost months transactions, most say it's unacceptable. And this takes us to step two, right? This takes us to step two, which is essentially, which is to create your RPO, right? And so, like I said, right, your RPO is the maximum data loss your business can tolerate, right? And so most companies, their RPO is probably for an hour to 1 day, and your RPO is the maximum data loss you can tolerate. And this leads us to backup strategy, where strategy one is your daily backups. So on with daily backup strategy. Automated backup once per 24 hours, suitable for non-critical data, and your RPO would be 24 hours, right? And so this is how it works. You back up your database once per day. Store backup in separate location. If disaster, restore from last night's backup. You lose 1 day of data, which is your RPO, would still be 24 hours. Your recovery time, 2 to 6 hours, which is your RTO. And so the recovery process is, firstly, your data, the disaster is detected. Secondly, you restore from last night's backup. Thirdly, replay transactions manually from logs. And fourth, the systems are back online. And so when do you use these? You use it with non-critical data. You can afford to lose 1 day. You can afford 2 to 6 hour recovery, and you should be budget conscious, right? And so this is like backing up your hard drive once a day. You do it at midnight, computer goes to sleep, backup happens, and the next morning your computer works fine, the backup completed. If there's a disaster, you restore from yesterday's backup, and so you lose yesterday's work. And so the trade-off is cheap and simple, but if something happens midday, you lose a full day of work. Usually this would cost anywhere from 200 to 500k, my bad, 200 to $500 per month. It's like a cloud backup service. And so when is this essential? With non-critical data, you can afford to lose a day. And so when to use it, I mean, like I mentioned, and this takes, and then there is strategy 2, which is hourly backups, which could cost anywhere from $800 to $1.5 per month, right? And which is, so what is an hourly? What is an hour? You have to create an hourly backup strategy, where automated backup every hour suitable for most business applications. And so how does it work? You back up your database every hour, store multiple hourly backups. If there's a disaster, you restore from last hour's backup. And so what happens is you lose maybe 1 hour of data, and your recovery time is 1 to 2 hours. And so this is like having autosave on your documents, right? Where every hour you save the current state. And so the next time there's a disaster, you restore from last hour's backup, and you lose this hour's work. And so again, the cost would be probably around $800 to $1,500 per month, which is basically because the backups are more frequent, which means this will be more costly. And so when is this applicable? It's applicable in most business systems, it's standard practice. And the strategy 3, right, which is real-time replication. So, which leads us to this third strategy, which is real-time replication. Now, what is real-time replication? More specifically, what is a real-time replication strategy? A real-time replication strategy is a continuous synchronization of data across multiple locations. Your RPO being the minutes, enabling failover with minimal data loss. And so how does it work? So your database continuously syncs to backup in real time. If primary fails, failover to replica is automatic. You lose less than a minute of data, and your recovery time is less than 5 minutes. And so this is like having a twin, not just a backup, but a copy that's always in sync. For example, if you have a heart attack, right, your twin is standing right there. They can take over immediately, no downtime, no data loss, And so what is the cost? It's much higher. It's anywhere from 5 to 10K, but zero downtime. When is this critical? It's with critical systems. You can't afford any downtime at all. And so when to use is, like I said, you have critical business operations. You can't afford less than 5 minutes of downtime. Your revenue critical systems and customer facing applications. And so what's the recovery process? Number 1, primary database fails. Secondly, monitoring detects failure. Thirdly, automatic failover to replica, which is probably less than 30 seconds. And fourth, application reconnects. Fifth is systems recovery. And then fourthly, you have your fourth strategy, which is the multi-region active strategy. And so what is this, right? So data is distributed across multiple geographical regions, each fully operational, enabling zero downtime failover and RPO, and getting RPO into SegWit. So how does it work? Database runs in multiple regions simultaneously. All regions handle traffic simultaneously. And if one region fails, traffic automatically reroutes. Right? You lose seconds of data, recovery time is zero downtime. And so this is like having multiple headquarters. Imagine your company runs in New York and LA simultaneously. If the New York office burns down, the LA is still running, no downtime. Customers don't even notice, and so the recovery process is, firstly, the region fails. Secondly, the automatic detection is less than a second. Traffic routed to other regions, less than a second. No downtime experienced by customers. Zero recovery needed. And I mean, the cost is very expensive. It could be anywhere from 25 to 65K per month, but there is true redundancy. And so when is this applicable? Only at massive scale. Think about your Uber, Netflix, and global operations. And so yeah, that's it. And so which strategy is right for your business, right? And so basically choosing your backup strategy is like choosing your insurance. You know, um you have your daily backups, like basic auto insurance, minimal cost, limited coverage, works for low risk situations. You have hourly backups, like standard insurance, reasonable cost, decent coverage, works for most people or businesses. Real time replication, like premium insurance plus security system, higher cost but comprehensive protection. Multi region, like having a team of bodyguards plus backup location only for VIPs or critical operations. And so it's important for you to choose the right level for your business. Don't over insure or under insure, And so this leads us to creating your disaster recovery plan. So what is your disaster recovery plan? Your disaster recovery plan is documented procedures for responding to and recovering from system failures, including detection, communication, recovery steps, and verification. So, okay, you've chosen your backup strategy. Now you need 3 documents. Document 1 is your RTO, RPO statement. Write down your RTO, we can afford X hours of downtime. Your RPO, we can afford losing Y hours of data. Why? Because that's what Z dollars to us, right? And so, for example, we have a RTO equaling. So, example, we have an RTO which could be 4 hours, an RPO which could be an hour, because we're the revenue is at $5,000 an hour and can afford up to $20,000 loss. And so we have a RTO. You could have a RTO of maybe an hour and an RPO of 0 hours, because payments must never be lost. Then there's document 2, right, which is your disaster response procedure. Write down step by step, how do we detect a failure? Monitoring alerts, which ones, who gets notified, how fast? Secondly, who responds, primary on-call person, escalation path, the communication plan, how do we tell customers? Thirdly, your recovery steps, how to restore from backup, how to verify data integrity, how to switch over to backup systems. And fourthly, there's verification. How do we confirm it's working? Are there any manual testing needed? How do we notify customers it's resolved? Then thirdly, there's a third document, which is your testing schedule. So in this schedule, you'd write down, we will test disaster recovery monthly. We will run a full recovery drill quarterly. We will test fail over twice a year. Why? Because a plan that's never tested is just fiction. When a disaster hits, you need to know that the recovery plan will work. creating a creating a I'm sorry. Okay, wait. And so creating a disaster recovery plan is like house fire preparedness. You know your evacuation routes, you know where to meet family, you have insurance documents ready. You practice evacuation monthly. When the fire hits, you don't figure it out, you execute the plan. And so it's the same applies with your system. Know your detection procedure, know who to call, know how to restore, test it regularly. A plan that's never tested is just fiction. A plan you practice, that works. And so here's what you need to understand: disasters will happen. It's not if, it's when. You need to know, firstly, your RTO, how long can you afford to be down, your RPO, how much data can you afford to lose, thirdly, your strategy, which backup approach matches. You need to document, firstly, again, your RTO, RPO targets, your disaster response procedures, and your testing schedule. The strategies could be daily, which is the cheapest, okay, for non critical, hourly, standard practice, reasonable costs, real time, fast recovery for critical systems, multi region, zero downtime for massive scale. And so most companies start with hourly backups and they upgrade as they grow. And so it's good to invest in replication when revenue reaches a certain threshold.